So, 4 days before Christmas, the Senate finally agreed on a stimulus. Kind of fitting, right? Just in time for Christmas. Very political. I'll go into the details in a little bit, but it's the first package since May, and man, I'm glad they finally got it done. But did they really have to wait until the 11th hour? People could have used this months ago. Today, I'm just going to give my take on why I think the US has handled this wrong, while some countries haven't. Hey everybody, Alex Kapitko here. And wow, Christmas is kind of coming up soon, huh? I'm actually just growing out the beard so I can be Santa next Christmas because kind of how the world's been going, I feel like I'm just going to have gray hair by then, honestly. So who knows? But in all seriousness, I think it's going to be a strange Christmas for a lot of people. So I think we just need to remember the simple side of it. Just remember the basics and try to be positive and spend time with your family, good food, good drinks, all the above. And anyways, Drew and I will be talking tomorrow about Russia as kind of our last episode going into the holiday. But I just want to talk a little bit about this stimulus because, we've been waiting for it since May. So I guess it's good it's got done. So let's read the background here. Forbes reports that Congress reached an agreement on a $900 billion stimulus relief bill. And this article was yesterday, Sunday. And basically what was happening is that the government was going to run out of funding at midnight. And of course, in the 11th hour, Mitch McConnell said that the House and Senate had finalized this agreement. And this is actually part of a $1.4 trillion omnibus spending bill for the 2021 fiscal year. And now this hasn't been finalized, but I think currently as I'm recording this, they are talking about it in the House and in the Senate. And the bill would reportedly send Americans making $75,000 or less $600 in direct payments. And household heads would also be receiving checks for each dependent child. And payments regressively phasing out till cap at, I think, $99,000 annual income would be where that starts to phase out. And federal unemployment benefits would also still be expected at a rate of $300 per week. And that'd be for 11 weeks. Gig workers are included, which is good, but $300 a week, just depends how you feel about that, but it's not much. Senator Mitch McConnell said that the bill includes billions for schools and billions for vaccine distribution. Good things, though I don't really have much on the specifics of that. There's also funding for a new round of loans for small businesses, though that term is definitely used loosely, and that's kind of part of the issue here. And then there's also $25 billion in emergency relief for renters, which is crucial with these rent control issues. And I think that's actually why we've seen things like Chaz and CHOP, or whatever you want to call it, pop up in Portland and Seattle. You have the uncertainty of people's kind of housing situations, and it makes them kind of want to rise up and take what they think is rightfully theirs. So I think having some stability in rent relief is crucial. Now, Mitch McConnell has said more help is on the way. He's been saying this since the summer, or even, I guess, probably the spring. But sadly, I don't really see this happening soon, as it took almost half a year just to get this. So this is where I want to kind of turn this to my take on the stimulus. Early Sunday, Trump called for Congress to put more money into the stimulus checks. And to be honest, I agree with him. And again, we're kind of seeing this progressive left and this kind of populist right actually agreeing on this, that Americans aren't getting enough. Now I still see Trump signing this because what's he going to do? Not sign it and then have the political chaos of declining a stimulus relief bill? No. So there's really no options here. But there is a great Brookings Cafeteria podcast episode, which comes from the Brookings Institute. And it talks on the issues of the U.S. stimulus and kind of a broader term about economics in the United States. So this episode has William Gale and Richard Reeves, who are two Brookings scholars and also really experienced in economic policy. And basically they mention that this is a different recession and crisis than other ones that we've seen. Basically you want people out of the labor force and you want to pay them to stay out, right? Normally you want to incentivize people to work. And, like in the 2008 recession, for example, you want to actually help stimulate businesses, corporations to actually help people get back to work. You want firms to invest more. That is stimulus. But these two men argue that right now the country needs relief. And this is different because it pays people not to actually get back to work, but it pays them to stay at home and observe the public health requirements to hopefully end this pandemic. And this is something more of a bottom-up approach. And they believe that this would help a growing issue, which is that kind of the pandemic has exacerbated the problems of the middle class, right? So the people who are kind of being hit the hardest are the ones who must go to work and can't work from home. And they're not getting enough help from the government in forms of relief to actually stay at home and still at least make some money so they're not going to go broke or hungry, right? And so you kind of have two diverging outcomes of this pandemic. You have the skilled professionals who can work from home, and you have people that can't. And unfortunately, it's all connected again because at the top of the income distribution, people are doing well, but they're spending less. And so it's indirectly hurting the people who can't stay home and also are reliant on a more vibrant economy. And so Gale and Reeves, the guys in this Brookings Institute podcast, argue that the pandemic has been the equivalent of a meteorite to the US economy and the world economy. Don't get me wrong. It's not like this is just an issue in the United States, but it's definitely been almost chaotic and impactful and catastrophic, almost like everything a meteor would do. So now, not every country has handled the crisis the same way as the United States. And honestly, if we want to look at a sample of how other regions have done it, I think Europe has taken the right approach. Now, notice I'm choosing my words carefully here, because when I say Europe's taken the right approach, I think they've taken the right approach to better COVID relief. Though I think in the long term, they actually could have worse economic outcomes from this pandemic, mainly just because the US economy is more robust in a lot of ways, and Europe is still recovering, especially Southern Europe is still recovering from the 2008 recession. And so I think these compounding economic issues could have long-term effects, more so than the United States. But that being said, I think Europe is doing a better job of helping people right now, so they're staying out of that poverty line, which could be detrimental to public health, public security, just kind of every aspect of the nation state needs people to stay somewhat afloat. I remember kind of glancing over articles in The Economist over the last 6 months that talked about this. And then there's also a great article from the New York Times from back in July that also talks about this. And it's called European Workers Draw Paychecks, American Workers Scourge for Food, basically. And it's a bit of a clickbait article, but it talks about how, in quotes here, in the pandemic, the United States has relied on extended unemployment benefits, while European governments have subsidized wages, avoiding a surge in joblessness. And this is exactly what Gale and Reeves talked about with the Brookings Institute interview earlier. And this article uses one example of a man in Ireland who's Brian Burns, who owns an event planning business. And as the government started to stop gatherings, lock down, limit access to indoor dining, etc., he was worried that he would have to furlough most of his employees. However, there was a great relief program that came out quite swiftly, actually, and when it was rolled out, it ended up providing 70 to 85% of his employees' wages. And there's a quote from him saying that, oddly, hasn't been a stressful time, he says. I can keep the team together, keep them motivated. We're basically doing everything we can to be ready for when the restrictions are eased. That sounds good to me. You know, his employees are still at least getting paid a good percentage of their wage, and they're still prepared to come back when a time is ready. So they have job security, and they're still making ends meet. Those are two positives, at least in my opinion. If you disagree with me, let me know, but I think that looks pretty good. And in Spain, also, the virus was awful in March, and all non-essential activity was halted. I was there. You know, it was nuts. It was tragic, kind of scary at the beginning. And a lot of people were worried that it was going to be chaotic. But there was a policy, which the English translation is the act of God. And it was a wage subsidy program. And this technically furloughed people, but it kept their jobs waiting for them when they returned. And the government paid them 70% of wages, you know, and in relation, 70% is not 100%, but it's better than what? People getting one measly stimulus check in the United States and then unemployment for a little bit until July. To me, that it's just not comparable. You should at least be getting something rather than just these measly checks that ended and started and just got confusing. And so, I mean, when I was working in Spain, you know, I had to stay home, but I saw no change to my monthly pay, even though I was working less. And so it makes you feel good during a time of uncertainty to at least have that certainty. And yeah, I mean, to name just a few countries, it's not just Spain and the UK, it's Germany, Denmark, Ireland, Britain, France, the Netherlands, Spain, Austria. They've nationalized payroll, subsidizing wages, and enabled paychecks to continue. And I think that's what the US should have done, to be completely honest. Because I think we've all heard stories about people who have had to wait for days and days to at least even apply for unemployment and start the process. You know, there's one story about a New York real estate worker who got furloughed, and it took him 72 days to get the unemployment check process going. Not 72 hours, 72 days. And he talks about how he had to basically borrow from friends, got to searching in trash cans for food. That's not good. We're one of the richest countries in the world. And now with Christmas, you know, I mean, okay, cool. 3 days before Christmas, they finally get this out, but it's so sad to see these food lines in countries up like in the 40 to 50 to 60% range. It's horrifying, and I just think Europe's been effective in doing this. And I think the difference here is that the US is amazing and great in so many ways, right? But Europe seems to have better infrastructure and this kind of communitarian approach to dealing with a pandemic, and it seems to work. What's his name here? There's a gentleman, Jacob F. Kirkgard. He's a senior fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Economics in DC, and he said, by and large, the European social model has proved quite adept and robust for this kind of crisis. And the U.S. to me is stuck in somewhat of an economic and political philosophy debate over the role of government. And I think that's always been the issue, is there's this push and pull in the U.S. where Europe honestly consolidated a great social apparatus around this pandemic. And in the United States, especially Republicans, are having trouble dealing with the role of government. They're against long-term big government, and they're having problems dealing with this idea of how to deal with a pandemic. They're afraid of this role of government, but they need to realize this is temporary relief. This is not some long-term program. No one's advocating for keeping all these programs in place. I mean, obviously, I've seen some people on the more far left that say, we can't let any crisis go to waste. But in general, this is just to help people. It's short-term relief. And a lot of economists, including these two gentlemen on the Brookings Institute from earlier, they said that the economy really could bounce back, especially in the United States, once COVID is under control. COVID is the problem here. And in order to deal with that, we need people to stay home. We need people to be safe and not need to go out and work and get at risk, right? And to do that, people need help. And so you really can't bring the economy back unless COVID is stopped. And to do that, we need to incentivize people to be responsible. And the U.S. is not doing that. So there's my little pre-Christmas rant. Please let me know, should I grow the beard out and become Santa Claus for next year? And we'll be back tomorrow, with, like I said, Drew and I's last talk of potentially the year. And so everyone have a very Merry Christmas, and be nice to your neighbors and stay sane and healthy.